Let me ask you quickly about, so you mentioned aromatase. Can you, for the audience, explain what that enzyme is? And then can you talk a little bit about sex hormone binding globulin and its relationship to estrogen and testosterone and how that's all playing in? Because I think that's a big factor that people don't understand.
Yeah, sure. So testosterone is so interesting. It's very interesting when you look at the synthesis of like sex hormones and you see them all the way through. And when you start studying it, you realize that this is, you don't, not one thing gets changed. Like when you see something that says, oh, boost testosterone levels, whatever, you're like, what is it doing? I want to know a mechanism. What's happening there? Because, we can get into that later or something, because I did look at some supplements and develop some opinions around them. But yeah, it starts with cholesterol, and testosterone is downstream from cholesterol. It's going to be created as a sex hormone. But I'll spare going through exactly how testosterone is created. But so when we have testosterone, it can be kind of siphoned into two different areas. It can basically moves into DHT, or it can move into estrogen, right? And so we can get DHT from testosterone via 5-alpha reductase, which is an enzyme, or we can have aromatase, which is an enzyme that is going to convert testosterone to estrogen, right? Those are usually the two fates of testosterone. And we do need, as men, we need estrogen, just like women need testosterone, but we also have a range that our body is going to tightly keep our testosterone and our estrogen, right? If we have all of our testosterone being siphoned off via aromatase into estrogen, that's obviously going to cause some problems. And you see this in later stages of obesity when we have a lot of inflammation going on. When you have higher levels of insulin, you tend to see, especially in an inflamed, insulin-resistant, more obese state, you're going to see higher levels of aromatase as well. And so with higher levels of aromatase, we're seeing more conversion of that testosterone to estrogen, right? And again, that's normal. That's how men actually get most of the estrogen in their body, is it's converted from testosterone. But if it's constantly at a higher rate being converted, now we have lower testosterone levels, then that can be obviously an issue. And then the same thing with DHT. We want it to be, converted over to DHT, because DHT itself is extremely beneficial too for men. When we look at sex hormone binding globulin, this is where it gets pretty interesting too, because with sex hormone binding globulin, a lot of people don't realize is going to basically house 98% of your testosterone. And we're only going to have a very small amount that's what we call free testosterone. And this is kind of a pet peeve of mine when people get blood work done. They say, oh, my testosterone was 800. My testosterone was 900.
Right.
But as you know, it doesn't really matter. And that's kind of interesting to a lot of people when they say, what do you mean? It's like, well, if your testosterone was 900 and then your free testosterone was 7, that's kind of bad, right? We want our free testosterone to be at least 2% or more of our total testosterone. If you go to LabCorp or look at some of the ranges given, they'll tell you like above 1.5% is normal. It can be below 2%, but you probably want to go and find out exactly why it is below 2% if you're hanging out at like 1.5%. But that free testosterone as a percentage of your total is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is due to it kind of just being shuttled around your body, bound to sex hormone binding globulin and also albumin. That 2% available is really important. So what happens if sex hormone binding globulin is going up or down? Well, it turns out we don't really want sex hormone binding globulin to go too high, and we don't want it to go too low.
Yep.
And when it goes, it can go high in response to diabetes. Depending on the stage of diabetes, sometimes we see higher levels of sex hormone binding globulin, but it tends to run inversely to insulin. So this is why, so to give you an example, type 1 diabetics tend to have very high sex hormone binding globulin, those individuals with type 1 diabetes, because insulin levels are incredibly low endogenously, obviously, right, through the nature of type 1 diabetes. And then in earlier stages of type 2 diabetes, you might see a much lower sex hormone binding globulin because insulin levels are really, really high. And then as it progresses, you might see, obviously as the nature of insulin resistance progresses, you see lower and lower levels of insulin because beta cells of the pancreas are kind of getting shot out. And then you might see a change there as well. Kind of a lot to unpack there, but sex hormone binding globulin, super important. And that notion of, the relationship between SHBG and insulin, super important to kind of understand. And it's a super important player in the whole game surrounding testosterone and its relationship to glucose for sure.
Yeah. So I'm gonna back up a bit. just so that everybody understands clearly what you just said, aromatase is an enzyme that turns your testosterone into estrogen, and it's higher when you have more fat on your body, particularly visceral fat and belly fat, guys. So I always tell guys, like, if you're rocking a gut, get rid of it. Getting rid of your gut, working all your efforts around getting rid of your gut is one of the best things you can do for your testosterone, so that you're not creating a depot of aromatase enzyme, because then you're just turning everything into estrogen. And men need some estrogen, but when it gets too high, when folks were looking at the data several years ago on, TRT replacement therapy is dangerous and people are having strokes, et cetera. No, the testosterone wasn't the problem. It was the estrogen that it was turning into. And so if your doctor's not keeping an eye on your estrogens when they have you on testosterone replacement therapy, a big problem. And then sex hormone binding globulin is basically the protein shuttle of that testosterone. And so you could have great total testosterone. And a lot of doctors will run it if you ask, and they'll even give you testosterone replacement, but they won't look at your free T. And what's free is what the cells have to use for the body to use, so cellularly.